Well, welcome back. You've been gone for a while.
I have. It's been nice to go out and see other places. And I got to visit this church that I've never been in before called Redemption to the Nations. And I'll tell you, for people or anybody listening who live in Chattanooga, what a church. Like that is the place. Um, it was incredible just to experience everything we experienced. And it was like 4 days of women's events. And so it started with a race, which running
A running race?
a running race.
Okay.
Sharon and I literally suited up. We ran through Chattanooga, but what was so cool about it is that they had these praying points. So you stopped and they were like, you took the Lord's Supper, and then they actually had a card for the things to pray for
Oh, wow.
in that next leg of the run. And so it was so powerful.
Like praying over the city?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, Chattanooga, and I didn't know this, but it's actually one of the gateways. Like there's a lot of history behind Chattanooga. And right now, there's just so much banter about Bill Gates and what he wants to put in Chattanooga and cameras everywhere. And there's a reason. There's just so much spiritual history there too, I believe. So It was phenomenal. Pastor Devin and Kevin Wallace. Have you heard of them?
Yeah, I've met them actually.
That's right. Yes. Powerful people doing amazing things.
That's awesome. And you got to actually share while you were there as well and speak. And so, I mean, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, talking with these women and listening to their stories, I could certainly relate. And honestly, of all the businesses we've ever done, I think when you're able to get in front of people and just give them hope and like they can hear your story and relate to it and see like, okay, I can do this, or I can be there one day, or I can get out of this debt hole. It's really powerful.
Yeah.
So it was a great trip.
I'm so glad you used that word hope because I really hope that that's the spirit of this podcast, is that we're prophets of hope.
Right.
Because so much out there these days is just doom and gloom and fear, and there's so much manipulation by fear.
Yeah.
And that is not who I ever want us to be. And I know that's your heart too. And so I'm just so glad that everyone got out there and got to get impregnated with hope and then come back and share it. That's what the world needs more of right now.
Yeah. I mean, I have always felt like this season I hear the word help. That's really the word that I feel like God's given me walking into this new season of just kind of leaving the corporate scene and being more of a help. And I think what you just said, hope, I hear you say that a lot. And so in this season, I feel like those are the two words that really summarize what we are hoping to bring to people on this podcast and through all of our calls that we do with individuals across the country. So it's been powerful. So good to see you, though. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad you're back.
So what are we talking about today?
So I thought today a good topic would be, is debt good or bad?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that would be a great topic.
And the question is, why are we talking about this? I had an interesting encounter the other day.
Right.
And I was discussing a property and a strategy with this individual. And they said all of a sudden, well, I don't believe in debt. And, it caused me to kind of take a pause and start to, think about that. Like, okay, is debt good or bad?
Right.
And so I think that, there is a certain banter out in the ether of the world right now of, debt is bad, just plain and simple. And then there's another part of society that's like, but wait, we kind of need debt to survive. So what are you hearing out there about whether debt is good or bad?
Yeah, it's so interesting when you were saying that. The thought that I just had in my mind, which I know is kind of probably the Holy Spirit dropping it, but isn't it interesting that, God sent his son Jesus down to pay our debts, to pay for our sins, to give us hope. And so I find it interesting that there's people out in the world that put out this projection like debt is bad. I don't see it as bad. I think it's just another area for God to show up for people, to say, hey, I can help you with that too, right? If I've forgiven your sins, I can also help you get out of debt if you just trust me. I don't know if there's any correlation there, but I just find that interesting. But I know Dave Ramsey has a lot to say about debt.
Yeah.
And I think that's, even from the people I've talked to, I think that's where a lot of the shame and guilt come from. Actually,
What does he say about it?
well, let me quote a few for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So back on May the 10th, 2023, and I quote, he said, "Debt always equals risk, and it's always dumb." Well, I mean, when I
Dumb.
hear that,
Yeah.
I see like a 3-year-old throwing a temper tantrum.
Mm.
So I wouldn't necessarily use the word dumb.
So if I'm a working class American and I have a mortgage, now I'm dumb?
Well, I guess so, Ryan. You're dumb.
Okay.
But more importantly, the first part of that, debt always equals risk. Now, there's absolutely some truth in that, but I just want to speak to that a little bit because I think that risk, we've always heard, with risk comes reward.
Mm.
And, risk in and of itself is the underlying theme with every entrepreneur out there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in essence saying that debt always equals risk and it's always dumb, what you should say and would say is entrepreneurship always equals risk and it's always dumb. And that's not true. Right?
Well, and the first thing that came to my mind when you said that he kind of labeled debt as risky
Mm-hmm.
and debt is always dumb, that at some point in Dave Ramsey's life, to get where he is, he took risks.
Totally.
So I don't know his personal balance sheet.
Right.
And I don't know what he had to do financially to get where he is.
Mm-hmm.
But my guess is, if he's like the rest of us, at some point in time, he had to take on some debt in order to get where he is today. And guess what? That was risk, but he believed in himself and he knew that he had a message that he wanted to get out there. And so he weighed the cost benefit analysis of taking on the debt to do it. And he made a decision. And so, I think it's really interesting when individuals like a Dave Ramsey and many others out there
Right.
sit on their lofty perch
Yeah.
and point down at people and call them dumb.
Right.
Do you know what Dave Ramsey's net worth is?
No, I actually have no idea.
Okay. Dave Ramsey telling people that debt is risky and it makes you dumb to take it on is worth $200 million.
Wow.
So from a $200 million perch, it's easy to talk about living life on cash. And the reality is, for most Americans out here, I think that debt is a tool. Debt is a tool.
Right.
And so I don't know that we can classify it right off the bat as good or bad. The answer is debt good or bad? Yes, it can be both.
Right.
Right?
Right. I mean, I don't think to your point, it's a tool. There is no good or bad associated with it. It's like any other tool. I mean, a shovel.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the analogy of a shovel, if you said, is a shovel good or bad?
Right.
Well, if I'm going to take this shovel and I'm going to dig a hole so that my neighbor falls into it if he tries to come on my property, I'd say the shovel's bad, right? It was used for an evil thing.
Right.
But if you were using the shovel to dig a hole to plant a tree that was going to yield fruit for my family for years and years and maybe even generations to come, then you can say that the shovel was good. And I look at debt in the same manner. It's simply a tool, and tools are intended to be used responsibly. And I think that's really the light we need to shine on debt, is that it's not necessarily bad to have debt.
Right.
It's bad to mismanage debt, just like it was bad to mismanage the shovel and use it to make a hole to hurt your neighbor.
Totally. There are circumstances, though, that are out of people's control. And I think that that's what always gets me is I've done so many clarity calls this week, and I'll hear from people and, their husband left them and they have kids, or their car broke down and they had no transportation to get to work. And so they've used credit to help and get them out of those circumstances that were out of their control. Now, you and I both know it's always great to have a savings built. It's always, a brilliant idea to have reserves, but that's not the reality for most. And so I think when we talk about good and bad debt, one, there's no shame or guilt around where you are, why you're there, wherever you are today can change in an instant, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that they know that. But I would like to better understand how you define good debt and what are the good debts versus what you would necessarily refer to as, yeah, that's probably a bad debt.
That's great.
Go ahead and retire that.
Yeah, that's great. I think so. Kinds of debt, right? So there are different buckets of debt. There is secured debt, which is debt that is collateralized by a physical item. And by collateral, it means there's something backing the debt. Some examples we know are mortgages. A mortgage is a collateralized debt. So there, you owe someone money, but it is collateralized by a physical piece of property that if you don't pay, they will foreclose on the property and liquidate it to satisfy the debt. Another secured debt is an automobile or a boat or a motorcycle or an RV. They all have an underlying asset collateralizing the loan. So in that case, you don't pay it, the repo man's coming or repo woman to take the collateral. So buy toy. Then there is the bucket of debt that's unsecured. Okay. So unsecured debt.
Which is what we love.
Which is what really our professional life has revolved around for the last 15 years. Unsecured debt is debts. So at some point, the banks decided, okay, there's a lot more people that don't have anything collateral than there is people that have collateral. So they made a mechanism to be able to lend to people without any security. And that's when the birth of the credit score came, and they had this rating system, the matrix, to tell the world whether you're a good borrower or a bad borrower. And so unsecured debt just simply means that the bank is the lender is lending you money without any underlying security. So that type of loan is inherently more risky to them because there's nothing they can take other than your credit score, your reputation, and your peace of mind whenever you default on it. So, I think the important thing to talk about within the scope of a conversation about debt is the principle of leverage. So leverage is and has been forever a very strong principle in wealth building because, the best way to describe leverage is if there was a heavy item you wanted to lift, okay, say you had 1,000-pound rock and you needed to get it out of your yard.
Right.
For thousands of years, what people would do is they build a fulcrum. They would use a log, and they would set the log, and then they'd use another log to prop up under the rock, and they would get on the one side and push down on the one side. And because of this fulcrum, it generates a principle called leverage, and you could lift 10 to 100 times more than you could without it. When you pop that fulcrum, boom, the rock moves.
Yeah.
And it's the same exact principle. Leverage is the principle of being able to lift something, and now we're talking in financial terms, that we wouldn't be able to lift otherwise.
Well, I can remember even when I met you, you always would say to me, listen, if you can use the bank's money, use the bank's money before you use your own money. It's worth a lot more for us to use the bank's money than it is our own money because we can still put our money to work for us.
That's right.
So why wouldn't we leverage the bank's money if it's accessible? But we've walked through seasons after we filed bankruptcy to remember we had to pay cash for everything.
Everything.
For 7 years.
Yeah.
So we have sat at both seats of the table and we know what that feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a slow grind paying cash for everything.
Yeah.
And when we were recovering from our bankruptcy, I can just imagine how long it would have taken us to get our financial legs under us if one man hadn't have trusted us with a private mortgage that enabled us to buy a $1.5 million house that no bank would have lent money to us. If we were saving for that house,
Right.
we would have been saving for years.
Yeah.
And yet he held a mortgage and it
Mhm.
allowed us to control a $1.5 million house when we did not have $1.5 million. And I think that's what is so powerful about real estate as a wealth building tool
Mhm.
is that I can have 20% of the value of the underlying asset. So in this case, if we're talking about a $1.5 million house, if I have $300,000, I can borrow $1.2 million from a bank
Mhm.
and be able to control a $1.5 million asset.
Right.
Now, what does that mean? When that house goes up in value,
Appreciation.
okay, appreciation, if it goes up 10% a year, that's $150,000 a year that I'm enjoying the appreciation on. And if I was only getting 10% a year on my savings, the $300,000 that I bought the house with,
Right.
that's $30,000 a year.
Right.
So that is a real life example of leverage.
Yeah.
I used the bank's money, right,
Mhm.
in a responsible manner to control and move a rock that I could not have controlled and moved unless I had their help.
Right.
That is a time-tested and proven strategy for wealth building. And I don't see how anyone could classify that as dumb.
Well, I think a lot of people will take on too much debt.
Mm,
And so I do agree with Dave Ramsey in the sense that, you don't just want to go out there and have debt just because to have
no.
debt. It has to be smart.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be very strategic.
Mm-hmm.
And so even after we recovered from the bankruptcy and we started getting debt extended to us again, I think that this time when we're walking through, like, we only recommend 2 credit cards when we talk to people. Don't get store credit cards. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
certain boundaries that we
Mm-hmm.
put into place
Mm-hmm.
so that we don't lean back over into what most would say is bad debt.
Right. Right.
And we only use it as a wealth building tool.
Mm-hmm.
I think even the people, now that we have the real estate rundown clarity calls on our website, it's been so great to hear when they call because they just don't understand how to leverage their properties
Mm-hmm.
or if it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could talk to that briefly, just, even looking at debt. A lot of people will say, well, I've got all this equity sitting in my primary residence.
Mm-hmm.
And, is it good there? Should I maybe take a lien out and purchase other properties? It's going to put me in more debt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would you say to those people?
Yeah, I mean, every situation is different, right? And but I think that kind of it depends on the phase of life you're into. There's some people that are just like, hey, I'm comfortable where I am. I want to
Mhm.
put it on cruise control.
Yeah.
But there's other people that are still interested in building wealth. And if you're still interested in building wealth
Mhm.
and utilizing the principle of leverage, then it's really hard for me to let money sit in a piece of property. Let's say it's a $1.5 million piece of property that I owe $250,000 on. That's over $1 million in equity that could be leveraged to control more property.
Right.
I mean, I always think it's interesting that, okay, this real estate worked one time to help me get to a certain level,
Totally.
but now I'm not going to replicate that and do it again.
Right.
So there's a lot of strategies in order to be able to leverage equity without actually having to liquidate the property. And that'd probably be my biggest mistake I've ever made. I always say, if I had to do all over again, I probably would have never sold one piece of real estate I ever owned. But a lot of times I saw that as the only way to access the equity that was in the property. But there are ways to be able to extract equity and then repeat what already worked for you one time.
Right.
And I think a lot of that comes down to healthy loan to values. Okay. So a lot of people got in trouble in 2007, 2008, 2009, and it was because they were borrowing at way too much money on collateralized assets. And so
This is a whole other show, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we could do a whole show just
Yeah.
on mortgages and really
Yeah.
better understanding what to go into and look for, whether it's
Yeah.
your primary investment. Because we have so much experience that's where we started.
Yeah. But to the topic of is debt good or bad?
Yeah.
Even good debt, mortgages, can be bad if they're collateralized and you're borrowing too much against it.
Totally.
So there's a system of being able to leverage good debt. How about right now? There's so many offers for 0% interest. Okay. If I told you, Amber, you're going on a cruise this summer and they're offering 0% interest. In other words, you make a monthly payment of X and there's no interest on it whatsoever. Would you take that deal?
Okay, yes, I would. However, I want to speak to this.
Yeah.
That's such a bait and switch for people, though.
How?
I just feel that most people are not once they agree to that, even though they have the money at the moment to pay it, they will find 100 other things to spend that money on. So that when it comes time to pay that bill, right, before it goes into an interest charging account, they're just at that point going to be like, oh, I spent it on XYZ, so I'll just make the payments and pay the interest. They know what they're doing with those zero interest.
Listen,
so I personally don't like to recommend to people.
I'm operating under the assumption that people are going to pay their bills.
Of course.
Okay. So if you're not sure if you can pay your bills, don't take out any debt.
Exactly.
Only live on cash.
Right.
If you have a track record of paying your bills and you are a healthy borrower,
absolutely,
then there are certain things like 0% interest loans that are very smart to leverage. And I'll tell you why. It is the principle of the time value of money.
Yeah.
My money is always more valuable to have in my pocket today. That's what it says. The present value of my money, to have it in my pocket today, is worth more than it being in someone else's pocket. So the more of my money I can keep in my pocket today, then I am winning. Okay. And this is about winning or losing, right? I want to control my money for as long as possible. So in a situation where it's a 0% interest and someone's letting me pay that slowly, I'm able to keep my money in my pocket for longer,
right?
And not have to pay any finance charges.
Yeah,
that's a beautiful
in essence,
thing.
it's costing you nothing, but you're gaining everything because you have possession of the item in which that you purchased.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And your money that you didn't pay for it at that moment has grown.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Exactly. I mean, I'll give you, John Deere was offering 0% interest for years leading up to the pandemic, like years. Now their inventories are like non-existent, so I don't even think that exists anymore. But as a farmer, if I can buy a $100,000 tractor,
right,
that I don't have $100,000, and they're going to say, you pay me $1,000 a month for the next 8 years.
Interest-free?
Interest-free.
Wow.
And now I can go out and start to plant crops and generate revenue that I otherwise couldn't have done without that 0% interest loan. That was a brilliant strategy on the part of the farmer.
Yeah.
And so that was a great analogy you used. If I can utilize someone else's money to help me generate current income today, present value,
right,
then that's a good move. And
absolutely.
So it's too hard to just say, is debt good or bad? I personally believe in the power of leverage.
Yep.
And I believe that all debt is bad if you don't pay your bills.
So if I had to summarize it then, what I hear you say and how I feel, there is no such thing as good or bad debt. Debt just is.
Yeah.
Right? I would just say debt is just like this noun. It just is. It's not, there's no adjective behind it.
Yeah.
It just is. And so regardless of where people are with it, doing a call with our team, being able to talk through and say, here it is, here's what I have. And we always tell people, pull annualcreditreport.com. You can get a free report. Look and see what kind of debt you're currently carrying and do an analysis with a clarity call. So we can determine, is this good debt? Is it bad debt? Is it working for you? Is it not working for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Right? And I'll remind you that we started our most successful business of all time
on a credit card. I know the irony of all of that, when I tell that story, every time I get to that line.
Yeah.
But we're risk takers.
We used $40,000 on a credit card.
The last credit we had extended to us.
And built a 9-digit valuation company off of that.
Yeah, but that
So
would have
was
never happened.
was that a good or a bad
Oh,
use of debt?
it was absolutely
It was a
amazing.
good use of debt.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot more people out there too that have similar stories that they've had to leverage debt at some point in their time
Right.
in order to build something of value. And companies do it all around. All these corporations in the world do it. And banks borrow money.
And I'm sure Dave Ramsey did it to start his company.
I would be shocked, and I hope I get to ask him one day to the extent he ever leveraged debt. And if he carries a black card, you know, it'd be kind of interesting to know.
Yeah.
But I think that every situation's different, and that's why the clarity call is so valuable, to look at every situation uniquely and then determine the right course of action.
That's right, because there's so many different options available to people, and I hope that by listening today, people just understand it's not good or bad. It just is, and we want to help you with it. We want to talk to you about it, and we want to help you grow your wealth by eliminating any debt that you feel you don't want to carry. And for those who are looking to start businesses, you know, big risk, big reward. And that's just the way it is. We're living proof of that in the businesses that we've started.
Yeah.
So it's such an individual approach that we're not here to just give a blanket statement as to whether it's good or bad. We just want to meet you where you are and walk you through depending on what your goals are financially. So I think that's been awesome what you've shared today. It makes me remember a lot. It makes me remember seasons to where I can remember we paid cash for everything, which necessarily wasn't a bad thing either. I think for those who are in debt and do start to go through our program and have a season where they have to pay cash for everything, it really allows you to remember the value of a dollar. When you're paying with a card, our kids are a perfect example of this. They have no idea, but then when we give them cash, they never want to spend it. Isn't that funny?
It's true.
But we were the same.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a lot of subconscious things that happen when you're not using credit cards to pay for things versus cash. But I don't feel like that's the best wealth building tool.
You know, at the end of the day, we have to remember that this is about stewardship.
That's right.
You know, the word says that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And we are called to steward his resources. And so if we start and operate from that place, then all the rest of this becomes crystal clear.
Right.
We have to operate from a place that it's his first. I'm going to honor him and I'm going to do the right thing. And, you know, that's what paying our bills is about. And that's what the principle of leverage is about. I can leverage other people's money and be honoring the Lord and stewarding his resources well. And so if we start from that place, we're always going to end up in a kingdom building mindset.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much. We're going to, until next time, hopefully we'll meet up. I know you have a trip on the horizon, so I'm excited to hear about that. And for those listening, please feel free, book a clarity call. We also now have the real estate rundown calls available for those of you who may be homeowners or maybe you don't even own a home yet.
Maybe first-time home buyers, homeowners, want to start investing in real estate.
Right. So definitely book a call with our team so we can put you on the path to financial wealth building tools and financial freedom with your debt.